So welcome to the 2019 MAS Summit for New York City. Thank you for joining us. So this is actually a very special summit because it's the first time that we are co-presenting this in partnership in our 10-year history. We're co-hosting this, and we couldn't have a better partner on this topic than the New Yorkers for Parks. Our organizations share more than a century of history advocating for the balance in New York's built environment and natural environments, and we're delighted now to be joining together to present today's program to launch the Fight for Light campaign. To Lynn Kelly and the entire staff of the New Yorkers for Parks, thank you for your expertise and friendship in this effort. So I have some housekeeping to do, and I'd like to take the opportunity to thank some individuals today. The first I'd like to thank are the Rockefeller Brothers Fund and the Green Acre Foundation for your support in the Fight for Light campaign that's inspired today's program, and the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs for their ongoing support of the summit. The Fight for Light Task Force, a group of experts in architecture, engineering, environmental justice, law, planning, public health, and real estate, have helped guide this effort over the past several months. A full listing of the task force members is in your program. Our speakers, especially Commissioners Kulisade and Silver, who I know are here today, lending their insights to today's discussions. Our hosts, the New York Academy of Medicine, this is the nicest and cleanest venue I've ever seen, have a remarkable building, so thank you very much. The members of MAS and the Playfair Coalition, remember to sign up at the reception for your exclusive tour of the rare book room on the 3rd floor. It's supposed to be remarkable. Finally, our outreach partners who are just across the street, the Museum of the City of New York. They have a table in the break room and a special opportunity for attendees, so please stop and learn about that. Now it's my honor to introduce our first speaker who joins us from the front lines of this fight. The Brooklyn Botanic Garden is one of the most cherished green spaces in our city. There are few spots where the stakes are higher when it comes to access to sunlight. Nearly 30 years ago, the city recognized the fragility of this public resource and passed special zoning protections designed to, quote, minimize the potential shadow impact upon the Botanic Garden from any new residential development. So you're going to learn about that today, but here to explain the battle from BBG, please welcome President and CEO, and as Elizabeth calls him, the unlikely revolutionary, Scot Medbury.
Well, good morning, everyone. Such an honor to be here. I want to thank the Municipal Art Society and New Yorkers for Parks for inviting me, and I'm really excited to tell you a little bit about the garden. We face an existential threat, so I really am very much of a reluctant revolutionary to be in this battle because we're normally about plants and kids and making New York a greener place. So this is an unusual place for us, but it's something we must do. So we're grappling with the issue that brings us all together, which is the impact of high-rise buildings on parks and green space. And so I want to give you a little sense of what our struggle is and how we're dealing with that. And so, see if I can make this go. And our little campaign, sort of echoing in parallel the MAS and New Yorkers for Parks effort, our fight for sunlight. So we're grappling with 2 large towers that are proposed near us. I'll share about that. But you know, the impact is not just on any green space. It's on a globally recognized institution noted for its leadership in youth environmental education, the winner of the National Medal of Museum and Library Service, and an institution that in drier years gets as many as 1 million visitors, and a cherished, appreciate that, Brooklyn and New York City institution. So it's really something that's pretty special, and so the impacts are important. So We think of BBG as North America's urban botanic garden. Most of our colleague institutions are sort of suburban drive-to destinations, or they're cocooned by large tracts of other institutional or parklands. So we're really the real deal, part of the urban fabric of our city, and have just decades of strength in that in youth programming and community greening programs, and it's a really special and wonderful place. You'll see that the size of the garden, our annual visitation I mentioned, and one stat that I need to probably tinker a little bit with, but it depends on how you approach this, but you've all heard perhaps that Brooklyn is the 4th largest city in the United States if it were separate from New York City. That said, it has about the least amount of green space acreage per capita. Brooklyn is a very densely residential place. And so we're not creating a lot of new open space in New York City. So what's at stake here is something that's really important. So the garden is that kind of V-shaped section in the middle of your slide, and to the right in the sort of open space is the little kind of lower central part is the project in question. It is the site of the Spice Factory, a kosher spice factory that's been operational since the 1950s, and a pretty good-sized parcel, but border to border, it's at closest about 150 feet from Brooklyn Botanic Garden. And what a pair of developers, the Continuum Company and Lincoln Equities, have proposed are two 39-story towers with 40-foot bulkheads, nearly 465 feet tall, just that close to us. And what's at threat is the garden's conservatories, greenhouses, and nursery complex. 21 separate chambers and facilities where we produce all the plants for the entire 52-acre garden, have a number of display facilities that enable us to do year-round programming with children, and sort of back of house where we have all kinds of interesting collections. We have nearly 13,000 kinds of plants grown at the garden. So this is sort of the beating heart of the Botanic Garden as described in the program and how we operate the whole of it. And the site for the conservatory and greenhouses was selected in 1910 when the garden was sited. It is the best site on our property to locate such a facility. In the 1980s, we expanded that complex and built a new conservatory. And so that's when some zoning came. Here is the proposed towers and what the shadows might do to the conservatories, and especially the nursery, where we produce about 25,000 annuals every spring, et cetera. So here is the beautiful lily pool terrace with the palm house, designed originally by McKim & White, with a conservatory complex by Davis Brody Beyond. And thanks to the Municipal Art Society, here's what we're looking at here. And so this is really gargantuan and out of scale to our immediate proximity. Similarly, we've been very busy in the last decade making improvements to the garden. We are capping this autumn a 10-year effort to really strengthen the garden and prepare it for its second century of service in New York. And so that's a lot of new gardens. It's really wonderful new visitor facilities. These two new gardens we finished this fall are just fabulous, so I hope you'll come out and see them. So this is one of them. This is the water garden, which is part of a massive water conservation project that is really innovative at the scale of North America. I really encourage you to take a look at that, how it handles stormwater, and using technology to do so is something quite interesting. So we've been really investing in this property and trying to improve it. And so, we want to protect our investment. So here, thanks to the Municipal Art Society, is what that complex looks like there. So I think you would agree to me, as we have Halloween looming, I was thinking about our staff Halloween party becoming the monster towers myself, but really scary. So this is the conservatory complex going up in the 1980s. And for you New York City zoning aficionados, what the zoning on the Spice Factory site is R6A, which allows for about a 7-story building. And that is a downzoning that was accomplished in 1991, largely stimulated or catalyzed by the creation of the new conservatory complex. And so you see a pull quote from the borough president at the time, sort of acknowledging his support for this downzoning to protect the conservatories and the garden. And so we're still there and we're still functioning. And so what is proposed now is, the zoning class I think is R9D, which is a very sort of obscure class meant for proximity to elevated railways, but that's 7 times the height of the present zoning. So there's the pull quote from the borough president saying, to protect scenic vistas and the garden from tall buildings and their shadows. So we have a lot of concerns about the impacts here, that it's very hard with as such a diverse collection of plants what that might mean for us, but it is probably, etiolation, greater length of internodes as plants reach for the light, greater susceptibility to plants and diseases, and especially fungal diseases. A number of plants won't flower, and there are plants that we wouldn't be able to grow at all. We've also want to underscore, actually the developers have asked whether we could consider artificial sun, quote unquote, and we snarkily say, well, maybe you could put that project on artificial earth somewhere else, but because we really are not into this. But anyway, this really diminishes what our programming and what we can do on the property. And this is not typical because of the outsize. I've made the point that BBG is just not typical green space, but a very special institution. And we're worried about the precedents that something so out of scale could create that other super tall could come in this neighborhood. So there are some issues with seeker that we've identified, but I've been talking this morning already and learning about other things. But the shadow studies generally start an hour and a half into the morning, but plants register sunlight right off the bat. So that's something that might be adjusted. Also, glass buildings let sunlight penetrate them and come through them and hit the next glass building next to them. And the methodology doesn't account for that. Every building is like as though it's a brick wall. And so we have launched a campaign, and very unusually, and so we have a petition. Please consider signing it. And tens of thousands of New Yorkers have joined us in kind of recognizing the importance of the garden and helping to protect it. And we have got a lot of presence in social media, et cetera. We have had quite a bit of PR in print and TV, and partly because we mounted an exhibit, Fight for Sunlight exhibit in the conservatory, where we're showing with scrims what those towers might look like from inside the conservatory and what the impacts as we understand them to be. And so there's some great things. They tell you how to text. We actually have some live video that show the shadow moving, and as I'm saying, as much as 4 hours to perhaps the most vulnerable collections, those that most need the sunlight, the conservatory that holds desert plants, and the back of house that supports that. And so this is pretty great, the exhibit. We actually do a little pull on a lot of interesting specimen plants that we're concerned about, the loss of sunlight. And those include a lot of so-called rescue plants, because we are a rescue center for things that are seized at the airports by the government, smuggled into the US. So we've got a lot of really, really interesting collections. So there's our story. We're really fighting this. I would tell you that Brooklyn Botanic Garden, in partnership with the city of New York, has invested hundreds of millions of dollars into this property as we move to our 110th anniversary. So an institution like us just doesn't come about overnight. And so we understand that housing is a crisis in our city and we need housing, but we feel it's a false proposition to pit affordable housing up against open space. We can have both, and we just need to be smart about it. And we hope that our city leaders will recognize that as well. Thank you very much.